And welcome back to the Cooler Jets podcast. We're Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Well, Michael, been a couple weeks since our last podcast. Obviously, in the meantime, the Jets made a massive trade for Haason Reddick, so we'll talk about that a little bit today. But 17 days away from the draft, I know you're excited to finally know who the Jets have taken, so we can fully evaluate this Joe Douglas offseason. But so far, so good, and probably better than good, because if you were to ask any Jets fan a month ago, what did they do in free agency, and you could tell them they fully rehauled the offensive line, brought in Tyron Smith, traded for Morgan Moses, signed Mike Williams to be receiver two, and made a huge trade for one of the best pass rushers in football. I think you'd be pretty stoked. And just when I thought I was out, the Jets have pulled me back in. So very excited about this draft. A lot of draft talk today. But first, Michael, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I mean, we were talking about this before, but I think first couple months of the off season, before any moves, after the season we just watched, it was that was a rough time because I think we both felt a little dejected, a little separated from the team, needed a break after what we just witnessed, but
Toxic
they pulled us
relationship.
right back in. They pulled,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it always has been with the New York Jets, and always will be, I think. But
I
or
mean,
any
you're
sports team
about.
you're a fan of,
We were
you're a
watching. I
fan.
mean, if you really want to know what Michael and I have done for the last year, we were watching like old highlights of Jets games. And Michael, I mean, you've never seen them be good at all. I mean, like the beginning of the 2022 season is literally outside. I mean, I guess 2015 was the best you've seen, and then the beginning of the 2022 season is the second best, and you stuck with them. So I think that's because your first year was what 2011 that you really watched them. I know you
Yeah,
grew up in Cincinnati,
2011 is the
but
first time I really started watching every game. So,
see, I
yeah.
got in when I was a kid. I remember like Pennington and them being in the play, but when I really got in was 2008. So I had about 3 to 4 years there where they were really good. Obviously, the back-to-back AFC championships, and to me, like that's what got me hooked. But you got hooked on just misery and sadness and disappointment, and here you are, and it shows. I mean, I can tell. No, I'm just kidding. But um,
That's
obviously,
fair.
this season is. I mean, you look around the AFC East. Obviously, the Bills trading Stephon Diggs. The Patriots are in full blown rebuild mode. The Dolphins have lost some big contributors and haven't really done much in the offseason. So the AFC East is about as bad as it's been since I've been watching. It's definitely as bad as it's been since I've been watching. And the Jets are definitely as good on paper as they've been since I've been watching. So this is, I think the Jets have a window of like maybe 2-3 years that they can be competitive and go for a Super Bowl. But this is out of that window, the prime year to do it. And to go from back to back 7 to 9 seasons, a what is it, 14-year playoff drought at this point, to winning a Super Bowl, that's a steep task, especially for a coach who has how many wins in his first 4 years here. But when you look at this team on paper, it's I'd put it up with any team in football. Is that crazy to say? I mean, if you're getting a healthy 2021 version of Aaron Rodgers, and I know people point to that last year, 2022, it's like, well, he did have the broken thumb, and even Aaron Rodgers at his worst is better than any quarterback that I've watched. You look at, if they get that version of him, if they can get 13 games out of Tyron Smith and maybe some of the playoffs, if the stars align for this team, look around. At least in the division, they're the favorites, right? I mean, I guess on paper you can't be the favorites because they've been so bad, but like the Bills aren't better than the Jets. The Dolphins aren't better than the Jets. I mean, I don't know. Before we get into any of the draft stuff, I mean, I think it's just a little. How are you feeling? How optimistic are you? Have the Jets beat any optimism out of you? Because I'll be honest, I'm getting sucked back in. I'm becoming the optimist on this podcast again. For like 2 months, we were both just sad, but I'm getting excited again.
Nah, I'm back in, and I think the Diggs trade really pushed me over the edge if I wasn't already, because like that just opened up the window, and I don't expect the Bills to be terrible or anything, and as long as they have Josh Allen, I think they'll be competitive, and they have some nice young pieces who could come up, but the whole core that has made the Bills the team that they've been the past half decade is pretty much out the window. I mean, how many defensive players they lost? Diggs, Mitch Morse, Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, all these guys are gone. Von Miller is old and was washed up last year. That team is not who they've been. And Miami has shown a clear ceiling. I mean, it feels like they were as good as they were going to be the past 2 years, and they still couldn't get past the wild card round. So
I mean,
the window is now.
McDaniel's. The Dolphins, I think, are the scare out of the Jets' three divisional rivals. They're the scariest to me, just because I think McDaniel is a mastermind, and anytime you have a great schemer in your division, like those division battles are always going to be close. He knows this Jets defense, and the Jets did not look good against the Dolphins last year. But like, yeah, on paper, you look at the Dolphins compared to the Jets, though, especially the defenses, it's not close. And you go back 2 years, it's like the Jets defense looked pretty good against that Dolphins offense anyway. So yeah, I'm certainly optimistic about the Jets' chances of not just making the playoffs, not even just winning the division, but going on a bit of a run here. Obviously, it all comes down to health, though, because it's like you're hinging on a 40-year-old quarterback coming off a torn Achilles. You're hinging on your starting left tackle, who's maybe the second best left tackle in football, maybe the best pass protector in football, but hasn't played a full season since 2015. Your other tackle coming off a torn rotator cuff, he did play through it, but that's an injury in itself, and he's over 30. Your receiver too, coming off a torn ACL, he's had some injury issues as well. So like, obviously, my experience as a Jets fan will let me know that a lot of guys are going to get injured. It won't be the perfect season that we're all imagining where everybody stays healthy. But I think the Jets have done a nice job of protecting themselves that even if some of these guys go down, it's like they have enough pieces to still be competitive. As long as 8 is up, and even then, I mean, like Tyrod Taylor, I think in a couple weeks, maybe not the entire season if Rodgers goes down in week 1 again, but like Taylor's shown in the league that he can be good enough to keep you alive for 4 to 6 weeks if Rodgers has one of those types of injuries. And obviously, we're going to get to the draft stuff. But first, I think we should talk a little bit about the Haason Reddick news, which kind of came out of nowhere. I was not expecting the Jets to make that move. Obviously, they were in on Jadeveon Clowney, so you knew that they wanted to add another edge. With losing Bryce Huff in free agency, which was obviously tough, they did bungle that whole situation, and we can get into comparing him and Huff a little bit. But obviously, people wanted the Jets to extend Bryce Huff earlier last year when he would have been cheaper. You don't know what was going on behind the scenes. The Jets have their plan. They drafted Will McDonald. Maybe Huff wanted to play it out. He was betting on it. Who knows? But at the very least, the Jets should have traded him at the trade deadline to a contending team. And the thing that's hard about that is they were kind of hanging around right at the trade deadline. I think, was that after the Giants game? Was that when the trade deadline was? So they were 4-3 when it happened? Or was it after the Chargers game? It was right around
there. Yeah.
It was right around the point of the season where they were still kind of in it. We're like, well, maybe the Jets can sneak into the wild. Whatever. They weren't fully out of it, but Rodgers had gone down, and I think that the writing was on the wall that this regime wasn't going to extend Bryce Huff. So they bungled the situation. He goes to the Eagles on a 3-year deal worth over $50 million, and it left him with a hole at edge. But you felt like, all right, well, Jermaine Johnson took a huge leap. You still have JFM. You took Will McDonald last year. Maybe they'll bring in another guy like a Jadeveon Clowney or even like a Yannick Ngakoue or somebody like that to fill out the rotation. But you're kind of banking on a Will McDonald lead. But the Jets in this all-in win-now year make a great trade, in my opinion, for one of the best pass rushers in football, giving up a 2026 conditional third, which could become a second if he plays, what was it, 70% of the snaps? I think it was 67.5, something like that.
67.5.
And Jermaine Johnson, I mean, I'm stealing your numbers here, but Jermaine Johnson was the highest edge, and it was 66%, right?
I think like 63 or 62, yeah.
So there's just no this is assuming he plays every single game like Jermaine Johnson did. He's not going to pass that threshold. So it's a 2026 conditional third. You get a 1-year rental. There were some rumblings that they might extend him, and maybe I'll open that up to you. Do you think the Jets should extend him? Because it's like, hey, he's a great player. He's 29. But when I look at this deal, it's like, I think the enticing thing to do is you have him as a 1-year rental, you let him walk, and then you get that comp pick in 2026, the same draft that you're giving up that third rounder. Maybe it's a 4th, maybe it's a 5th. And it just turned into a little trade down in 2026 to get a 1-year rental in your prime year. So what do you think? Do you think there's any chance that they'll extend him? Because I know there were some rumblings about that.
I don't think they will, because I think this makes the most sense as the one and done sort of thing. Because, I mean, you're getting him here at 30 years old, and
29.
he's still in his prime. Oh, he's going to be 30 before the season, so he's still in his prime. He should be able to be effective this year, but you're anticipating he's going to decline at some point, especially because he is a very athleticism and speed reliant type of player. So, get him in here on 1 year on a contract year, get the most out of him for this year, let him walk. And you're assuming that you're not going to do much in free agency next year with all the restructures they made, everything they've done. It feels like if you let him walk next year, you should get a comp pick. Because this year, they're not getting anything for Huff because they signed too many people to cancel him out. But next year, you let Reddick walk, you should get that comp pick. And if he gets enough, you're probably looking at a 4th round pick for him in 2026, the same year you're trading, what is very, very likely a third round pick. And so basically, you traded him to move down 1 round in 2 years to get 1 year of him this year. And that's an absolute steal. So if you extend him, then I think it gets, no, then you're taking a gamble that he's going to, continue to produce at this level into, being 32, 33 years old, which he could do, but is definitely a gamble. But I think if you just get 1 year out of him, let him walk, take that comp pick, then you're in a good spot. And you still have Will McDonald there developing to fill his spot adequately, with an in-house affordable replacement going forward. And he's not buried because of this trade. I think for this year, yes, it does diminish his role and prevent him from having a too high of a ceiling compared to where he was last year. But going forward, like, this is only year 2. If you look at Reddick himself, he didn't break out until his 4th year. So there's plenty of time for these guys to develop. It doesn't have to be the first year, even the second. I mean, you'd like it to be, but it doesn't always play out that way. So I still think McDonald down the line could elevate into that role. And that works best if you keep Reddick for 1 year. Hopefully McDonald learns from him, grows this year in however many snaps he plays, and shows you that he can be trusted to take over starting next year.
Yeah, I mean, he's still obviously going to play a lot. He'll get a bump in snaps. Inevitably, somebody's going to get injured, and even if not, the Jets essentially need 4 starting edge rushers just with the way they're going to rotate it. So I think you're going to see obviously a bump. And then, like you said, I mean, Haason Reddick's been even open in his introductory press conference about mentoring Will McDonald and teaching him what he knows. And they're similar players. When you look at Reddick, though, I think when you compare him to Bryce Huff in a vacuum, he's clearly a better player. The thing with Huff is like he's a guy who's on the upswing. He's younger. He had less pass rush snaps, and his win rate was, I think, the best in the league or second best in the league behind Myles Garrett. So obviously, in a small sample size, Bryce Huff was a very, very elite pass rusher, and I still think he's going to be good. And I think he showed that he was developing as a run defender. But what you get in a guy in Reddick is a guy who was playing the entire game for Philadelphia and is a damn good run defender and has been consistently one of the best pass rushers in football. So he's a more sure thing at 29, but he's, on the downside of his career. You're only going to have him for 1 year, most likely. And the way I looked at the trade, because I think a lot of people were like, well, if we're going to pay an edge rusher over $15 million, I'd rather just re-sign Bryce Huff. But like that ignores 2 things. 1, Reddick is the better player. But 2, Bryce Huff is a multi-year deal. You're going to be paying money in 2025, 2026, 2027. I think he has something like it's $25 million owed in 2026.
It's very backloaded.
Yeah, it's a backloaded. And like that's what the Jets are doing too. Like they'll add void years and kick the can down or they'll extend him. And what they'll just keep pushing that money down the year. And then with the salary cap increasing, it'll kind of pay for itself. And so you're seeing a lot of teams do that. But at the very least, I think that is right. 2025, 2026, that's right when the Jets are going to be re-signing and giving guys extensions like Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson and Jermaine Johnson, maybe even Breece Hall. They're going to have a lot of money. Quinnen Williams is getting paid a lot of money. So I don't know if they had the luxury as much to give a long-term deal to a guy like Huff when it's like you have Jermaine Johnson and McDonald in the wings. To me, this is a 1-year rental and you get the comp pick back. And it's not even just his comp pick. I think that 2026 draft is going to be huge for the Jets because, yeah, they won't have as much money because they're going to be extending guys like Garrett and Sauce and Jermaine or whatever. But maybe not, but like Tyron Smith might walk next year. Mike Williams might walk next year. Morgan Moses might walk next year. So you have all these guys that are going to be free agents next year. And so you might have a lot of comp picks in 2026. And so I think they've done a nice job of arming themselves for the future and saying, we're going all in, win now, 2024. They'll still be good in 2025 if Rodgers is the same. And maybe they'll re-sign some of those guys. Who knows? But 2026 is going to be the beginning of the end for Rodgers. Maybe it'll have already happened by then. Maybe he's retired. It'll be the beginning of all those big money extensions for Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson in that class. And so you're going to need to be able to build through the draft and build through those mid-rounds, day 2, early day 3 picks if you want to sustain a winning culture. And so I think, to me, that's why this trade makes sense is you're renting the better player for 1 year on short-term money, and then you're going to recoup that comp pick right when you're going to be able to really have to build through the draft with all these extensions.
Yeah, I think overall you are getting a short-term upgrade here, and that's because of the well-roundedness of Reddick's game in comparison to Huff. And I think you're talking about 2 much different players here who are going to bring very different things to the table. With Huff, I think with Huff, it's his consistency as a pass rusher that's most appealing about him. Like when you look at his pressure rate, win rate, all those things like that, like he's top of the line. And I think he'll continue to do that even if he plays more snaps. It'll probably normalize a little bit. Like, in all those metrics I just mentioned, he's right on par with Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, all that. If he plays more snaps, he'll probably come down a little bit, but he'll still probably be near the top in terms of getting pressure and just winning. But Reddick, I think, clears him. And Reddick isn't quite as good in some of those metrics, but he's still very good in terms of pressures, hits, things like that. So Huff takes the advantage there, but Reddick, it's the finishing that Huff was never, too great at. I know he got 10 sacks last year, but with the number of pressures he got, he was pretty average in terms of converting pressures to sacks. With Reddick, his ability to get the sack when he gets home is as good as it gets in the league. I mean, he's got the fourth most sacks over the last 4 years, double-digit sacks 4 years in a row with 3 different teams, showing you that he could do it in different schemes. So, it's the finishing with Reddick. You're going to get those sacks. You're going to get the strip sacks as well. He's got the most forced fumbles over the past 4 years. And then on top of that, he's able to do it while playing a high volume of snaps. And that's really the big concern with Huff is in his role, you can't ask for him to be any better, but to justify the contract he got, he's going to have to play more snaps or else, even if he is as good as he's been, if he's playing the, same low snap count that he was with the Jets, it's kind of an overpay, even if he is that good. So he's probably going to play more snaps, and you just don't know yet how his production is going to hold up as he plays more snaps. Because you look at, and I put this in one of the articles I did about Reddick, but if you look at Huff's numbers based on how many snaps he played against the run, his pass rush production clearly declined in games where he had to play a heavy workload against the run. So that suggests to me, when he has to play more snaps overall, he's not as well rested. And if he's playing more rundown reps and he has to, because when you're playing that role, when you're a pass rush specialist and you're not really thinking about the run, it's very easy to just pin your ears back and go and just get off the snap really quickly. But if you're playing more snaps against the run, you have to think about that. You can't just explode off the ball every time because you don't want to run yourself out of a run play. And so with Huff, in the games when he played the most snaps against the run, his pass rush production went way down. So that's the concern with him. And you compare that to Reddick, who played as many snaps as any edge rusher in the league over the past few years. It's not a concern. He can be productive on a heavy workload of snaps. So it's safer to make that investment in him. And then his run defense, he's not a great run defender, but he's pretty average. I mean, he's kind of undersized for the edge. I think in comparison to Huff, he is a little bit lighter too. But he's a splash playmaker. He does make a lot of tackles for loss in the run game, which is something Huff didn't do. He had a couple this year, but not a strength of his game. So I think you're getting average run defense, a guy who could handle heavy workload of snaps, big-time sack production, big-time forced fumble production. And he's a guy who can move around too. Like he's played linebacker in his career. He can stand up. He can put his hand in the dirt. You could put him in the A gaps over the center. You could do a lot of different things with him. He's a little bit more, or I would say significantly more versatile than Huff in terms of alignment and roles.
Yeah.
And he has coverage experience too. Because again, like I said, he started playing off-ball linebacker at the start of his career. Then they moved him to the edge in his 4th season, and that's when he really started to break out. So he can do it, but I think it's more appealing to look at it the other way and project him to a scheme with the Jets where, the Jets almost never drop their defensive linemen.
They did get a little creative with Jermaine Johnson at times last year with their alignments, especially
they did do it sometimes, but like he alone played more coverage snaps than the whole Jets defensive line last year, every single player. So
yeah,
it's something they will do occasionally. It's a nice little weapon to have. But I think it's more appealing to say, like, okay, look at him with these other teams. They're dropping him into coverage like 4 or 5 times a game. Now come to this team with the Jets where you don't have to do that anymore. We're going to make use of your best skill, and that's rushing the passer. There's a reason you're not playing linebacker anymore. It's because he couldn't cover, but he can get after the quarterback. So I'm more excited to see him come to the Jets and, compared to the last few years where he's played a decent number of coverage snaps, we're going to take those out of his game and turn them into more pass rush opportunities.
Yeah.
And he could be even more productive getting up to the quarterback. But still the alignment versatility is something that is a nice bonus and gives you more options for
Yeah,
creativity.
especially when you have a guy like Allen in your division who's going to run all over the place. And I think they probably keep Jermaine Johnson in that role of like when they would have him QB spy Allen when he was really getting them with their legs. But Reddick gives you a lot of versatility, and I think you know, yes, it's all gas no break on that defensive line, and yes, they're going to rotate him, and yes, they want to utilize his ability just purely as a pass rusher. But I do think you're going to see him get versatile. Like you said, though, he will play the least amount of coverage snaps that he's played his entire
Yeah.
career, and that's going to be an exciting thing to watch. How do you think they're? I mean, and we're going to do a podcast with Joe Blewett next week, so maybe we could talk about this a little bit more with him. But ultimately, what is their starting? And I use the term starting very loosely. What's their starting defensive line look like? What's their first down defensive line look like? And then maybe what does their third down package look like? And obviously, they're going to be rotating. There'll be all sorts of different packages. But last year, it was Jermaine Johnson and John Franklin Myers as your starting edge because those are your two best run setting edge defenders. And then inside, you had Quentin Williams and Al Woods at times, Quentin Jefferson at other times. This year, though, you can either keep that the same. It's like, hey, Haason Reddick can play run defense and he'll get plenty of first down reps. But it's like if we're 1st and 10 start of the game, maybe we don't need to have him out there. Maybe we can save him for 2nd and 3rd down when it's a more likely pass rushing situation. We can keep John Franklin Myers, keep Jermaine Johnson, and maybe Javon Kinlaw and Quentin Williams are interior guys, or Lecky Fotu. Or if you want to get all your best defensive linemen on the field at the same time, maybe JFM starts playing more in the interior, which is something we talked about a lot last year. I thought we were going to see more of. But I think they've downgraded in the interior somehow with Quentin Jefferson getting half of what Javon Kinlaw got. And maybe Saleh, clearly they really wanted Kinlaw. So maybe Kinlaw goes off this year. But I think ultimately defensive tackle is a little bit worse. And you can make the argument edge is going to be a little bit better because you have you have Jermaine Johnson going into his 3rd year, of Will McDonald taking that hopefully a 2nd-year leap, and you have Haason Reddick. Do you think you're going to see a starting defensive line of maybe Jermaine Johnson and Haason Reddick as your starting edge rushers on first down, and JFM and Quinn inside? Or do you think they won't? I mean, they won't move JFM inside on early downs.
There's a lot of different ways to go about it, and it is very interesting with Reddick coming into the picture now. But I think generally your first down base kind of look is going to have JFM and Jermaine Johnson on the edges, because I still think that's your best look against the run. And Reddick can play more snaps against the run, so he will outsnap what Huff played last year, which I'm going to look it up right now. But he was in the 40s, and Reddick, I think you're probably going to see. Huff was at 42% last year, so I think Reddick will be north of 50%, maybe close to 60%. But he's not going to get to that. The condition that they put in that trade. I think that's a very carefully selected number because, like I said, Jermaine Johnson, I'm going to pull his up too, but he was their leading snap getter on the edge last year, and he wasn't even at that number. Yeah, he played 66% last year, and he led the way by a pretty wide margin, and I think he'll continue to do that because he's still their best two-way guy, and he's only ascending. So if you assume Reddick plays every game, and he's not going to pass Jermaine Johnson, he's not going to hit that 67.5% mark. And I think that's another appealing thing, too, with him coming to this team, is he's going to play much fewer snaps overall than he's usually played in his career. So he's also going to be a lot more fresh throughout the game than he's usually been. I mean, you look at his snap counts, at least 74% each of the past 4 seasons. And like I said, I think it'll be low 60s this year. So he'll be fresher. He'll be playing more pass rush and less coverage. So I think it's going to really unlock his pass rushing in a lot of ways. But yeah, in terms of the alignment, I think you still like that JFM edge look because the Jets have really shown a valuation of run defense on the edge when you look at their moves, whether it's drafting Jermaine Johnson, playing JFM on the edge, letting Huff walk, and then getting a guy in Reddick who, not that he's a run defender, but compared to Huff, more trustworthy in that phase. Drafting Michael Clemens, playing him on the edge. They've really shown a care for edge setting because, at other positions, it hasn't been as much of a priority. It's been pass rush, pass rush, pass rush. But I think having good edge setters is important because, as long as you could set that edge, channel it inside, that's when you can let the linebackers make plays. Let Quincy Williams get in there. Let Mosley do their thing. So I think first down, you're still going to see that. But I think Reddick will get mixed in there sometimes. you could see it mixed up with JFM moving inside more. And then I think pass situations, your main look is definitely going to be, if we're talking about third down or if it's obvious pass situation, end of half, you're leading in the second half. That's another thing the Jets have not gotten to do a lot of. Second half leading
Yeah.
other team, having to go pass every play. We never, can we pick one game where that's happened? I don't even know. But that's when you get a lot of your pass rush action. I forget what the stat was, but Reddick is up there in terms of like fourth quarter sacks or something like that. So he's a really good closer, and the Jets haven't had to close a lot of games.
You ready for a crazy alignment if they need to close a game, right? All right, ready? At edge, Will McDonald, Haason Reddick. On the interior, Jermaine Johnson and Quinnen Williams. How do you feel about that?
You could do that. I mean, I know
he has that
Jermaine
versatility,
Johnson
and they never use it.
Did a lot of like stand-up reps on the inside, like standing over the center. But I mean, he's definitely got the strength to do it. If you want to get really creative and just get full-on pass rush juice out there, I could see that. But yeah, I think third down, main package, JJ Reddick on the that's what we should call this edge duo, JJ Reddick, I guess.
Oh God,
there's something you could do with that. I don't know, but JJ and Haason Reddick on the edges, JFM inside, and Quinnen, like, that's as good as it gets. And I know Huff, like, as part of that unit, it was great too. But it's just a different element in terms of, I do think Reddick will maybe be a little less consistent in terms of pressure, but the sacks and the finishing and the forced fumbles are going to be up. And with all the weapons they got in there, opportunities are going to be pushed his way, and he's going to make the most of it. And you mentioned it before with they already had Jermaine Johnson as a really good Josh Allen counter with his ability to finish plays in space. And he's a good finisher himself with his length and athleticism. And Haason Reddick brings that ability too. So especially you look at the Bills game or anytime they play a mobile quarterback, it's very appealing to have Haason Reddick and Jermaine Johnson as your edges. It's going to be hard to get outside the pocket and make plays against that combination.
End of the day, he's a weapon, and I think they really can get creative. Hell, they can even use him if they go base 4-3 personnel. They could put him at Sam outside linebacker. I know you're saying like we don't want to have him be pass coverage a lot, and I think if you're going base defense like that, that's usually going to be a run situation. But it's like he has that flexibility where they can get creative with the packages they put out there, especially if Will McDonald takes a JJ like second-year leap. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about this the entire offseason, but next week we'll have Blewett on, and we can talk a lot about how they'll deploy this defensive line. Before we I guess we'll kind of get into a little bit of the draft stuff. At this point, every topic is a bit about the draft because that's the last opportunity for the Jets to really add to this team. I'd imagine they're going to make maybe one or two other free agent signings. Like I could see them bringing in another receiver, just depending how the draft goes. Maybe like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling, or maybe an OBJ type of receiver addition, maybe a safety, like running back too. I could see them making another free agent addition, but it'll be bottom of the barrel guys. And at this point, it's the draft, and we obviously know that the main hole for me, and like we'll get into the philosophy on Jets Twitter. There's a lot of the debate is at pick 10, do they take an offensive tackle who's a supposed backup, or should they take a pass catcher like a Brock Bowers if he's there, or Roma Dunze if he's there to really bolster the offense? Obviously Mike Williams has his own injury issues. You want somebody across from Garrett Wilson. And let's just be honest, it's more exciting than taking a supposed sixth offensive lineman. We'll get into that discussion because I'm very steadfast in what I believe the Jets should do. But outside of offensive tackle and receiver, let's just run through quickly some of the remaining holes on the roster. And the only reason I want to do this is because I think it's important to remember that while the draft is not a shopping list, especially after the first round, and I see a lot of mock drafts where it's like the Jets take offensive tackle at pick 10, and then they take a receiver at pick 72. And they might do that. There might be a receiver they really like. It's a great receiver class. But like, I won't be surprised if pick 72 rolls around and they take a safety, or they take a cornerback with Michael Carter the second and DJ Reed being free agents next year. Like, when pick 72 rolls around, they're going to take the best player on their board, and they're keeping in mind not just their current as it stands needs, but their future needs as well. And corner is definitely one of those. So what are some of the remaining holes you see on this roster, and kind of some dark horse positions you think that they might target in the draft in a couple weeks here?
You mentioned some of them for sure. Safety is absolutely in that mix. Going after an RB2, that's still something they haven't addressed. Developmental quarterback has to
Yeah.
be kept on the table. D tackle, I think, is still in the mix.
Always. Yeah.
Corner, I think the corner is one to keep in mind because like you want to look ahead as well. And DJ Reed, his contract is coming up, and hopefully they keep him. I think they should, but a lot of guys to pay in this team, so you don't know who the casualties are going to be in terms of you can't keep everyone. That's just the reality of it. So looking ahead, and Michael Carter II is in that mix. Sauce is your only starting corner signed for 2025 right now, so that's something to keep in mind. So those are a few I would put on there. But I totally agree with you. Like I could see that third round pick coming up, and like we're all looking at it right now. Like okay, we're gonna get our lineman or let's say lineman or weapon in the first round, and then we're gonna get the other one in the third round, and like we're rolling, we're filling all these holes. But then it's gonna come up and it's gonna be. I mean, what was the made up generic name?
I don't know.
It was so perfect.
John Williams from Illinois, corner. It's just like who?
Yeah, like
a lot of times.
A lot of times
they turn into that's how you get good players in the third round. Is you can't just be like, all right, filter by receiver. That's who we're taking. It's like you got to take a lot of times you might get to pick 72, and on your big board you have a guy in your 40s still available, and it's like that's what the Jets are going to do. They'll keep in mind the future needs, but I really think outside of like what's the one position? What are the positions they will not take at 72? Because I could see them taking a quarterback at 72. Like I think all options are on the table outside of. I mean, if there was a great running back, if somebody who really fell, would they do that? Maybe. Receiver, yes. Offensive line, yes. Tight end, yeah. I mean, is there a position? Maybe edge is the one position, but we know that they love their edge rushers, and if he has some inside versatility, I think edge is like the only position I can't really, outside of punter and kicker, I can't see at 72. But outside of that, everything's
open. That's
what
I was going to say. I think edge is not, unless
linebacker,
it's like,
maybe?
Nah, I just can't see edge. That's the only one because it's
linebacker.
Where is that guy going to play at this point? It's just that is the one where I'm like, all right, there's zero way you could justify that because I agree that I think, and you were saying this before we started, but like past first round, I think it's just straight up best player available because first round need matters because you're paying that guy a lot of money relative to the rest of the draft. It's a huge difference, especially if you're high in the round. You're paying them a lot of money. It's a premium investment that usually is a high hit rate. So you expect that guy to play and be a good player. So that pick you want to use on someone who, has a path to playing, even if it's not in year one, like he projects as your year two starting tackle, quarterback, whatever. So I think need is a bigger factor in the first round because it's such a premium investment. You want to make it count as much as possible. But past that, it's, you just want to maximize your chances of getting anything out of the pick because the hit rate is so low, the investment is so low. Just take your highest ranked player, get as much talent as you can, let the chips fall where they may. So outside of edge, I think pretty much I don't think there's anything else I could see not being on the table there.
I'm trying to think of the third round picks the Jets have had. Obviously, Jeremy Ruckert. I don't think they had one in 2021. They didn't have one last year. 2020 was Ashton Davis, who, by the way, what's up with Ashton Davis? Not re-signed yet? What's going on there?
Yeah.
Do you think they're just in a bidding war with another team and they're just, incrementally, it's like
maybe $5,000. Waiting to see how the draft plays out and like see if there's still a starting spot he can get. But I hope he comes back because he was a great fit in that role. And speaking of Reddick, like if they don't get Davis back, it'll be interesting to see how they fill that. But he gives them an option to, play that role at times. And like I said, I personally don't want to see too much of it because
Reddick playing more
coverage?
Yeah,
so I didn't really get to it. I'm saying because, go back to 2022. Like Quan Alexander was playing that third linebacker role most of the time. They don't re-sign him. And, we thought maybe Sherwood would replace him, but they didn't really do that. He only played a small fraction of what Alexander was playing. And it was Ashton Davis
Mosley's backup,
taking over the the majority of those sub-package snaps. So if they don't bring him back, I'm not saying like, Reddick will be Quan Alexander, but just occasionally he could take a portion of those, 3 linebacker set packages.
Right.
And he doesn't even have to like play off-ball linebacker. Like you could do a package with, like you said before, put Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson on the edges. Let's put Quinnen and JFM inside. And then Reddick is just like your chess piece. He could stand behind, over the center. He could, you could have 2 edges overload on one side. I think you could see some creative looks like that, and it could become more likely if you don't get Ashton Davis back, and that, those base package, bigger sets, bigger packages, there are more snaps available for that. But that's just a thought that came
Yeah.
to mind. But
Well,
yeah, Ashton Davis, I would like to see
I'd
re-sign.
like to see him back too because I love Chuck. I love Chuck Clark. I was really high on that trade last year. Then obviously he tore the ACL. I think he should be. I mean, tore it in June, so he should be good to go. And I think he should be an upgrade. But I love Ashton Davis as that third safety, and I think he's gotten better every single year. He's a key special teams player, and the Jets lost Hardy. Went to the Browns, and I know they have Irvin Charles, who they really like as a gunner, and so maybe that'll be their designated special teams guy. But Davis is like their special teams captain if Hardy's not there. I mean, just the role that he's had on punt and kick coverage. So I'd really like to see David. Speaking of special team stuff, I mean, we're really jumping all over the place here, but what do you make of the kickoff change? Do you think this?
Yeah.
I mean, does this benefit the Jets? Do they? I've seen some rumblings about like, well, hey, if you're in a playoff game, do you put Breece Hall back there to run back kicks? Because you're definitely gonna have a lot more kickoff return for touchdowns. We'll see how overpowered this new rule is. Because I was looking at it, I was like, that's kind of really hard to stop if they're all lined up 5 yards across from each other, and then it's just a free man. You know what I mean? Like it seems seemingly a lot harder to stop than the old kickoff rule. So I think you might get to week 4 and be like, damn, we've had 12 kickoff returns, maybe not 12, but we've had 10 kickoff returns for touchdowns. Like, is this too much? What do you make of the kickoff rule changes? And then I guess just, the importance of these special teamers that the Jets have let walk.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it because the kickoff was just such a pointless play and a waste of everyone's time. It's like you're basically watching a guy just kick the ball through the end zone with 90% of the time. So
pretty much.
It was terrible play, and I really think they've saved it. It's the injury rate is supposedly going to be lower with this play, which is the only way they would justify it because everything has to be 100% safe in this game, or guys are 250-pound guys are running at each other, but everything's got to be perfectly safe, which it seems like this is safer than the usual kickoff. And returns are definitely going to be up when you look at, because it's mostly kind of off that, XFL. I think it was XFL, one of those leagues. It's based off of that, and the returns were way higher with this format. And yeah, I think it's going to make a comeback. So it's going to be a more important fixture of special teams. And for the Jets, I think it could be good and bad news in some ways. The bad news is that you lost Justin Hardy, who was a big part of their coverage teams, because they have been really good at kickoff coverage in recent years. They haven't had to do it a lot. A, because of, around the league returns are down, but B, the Jets don't score touchdowns, so they don't kick off a lot.
Yeah.
So they barely did it. But when it did happen, they were, near the top of the league in terms of yards per kickoff return. But Hardy's gone, so that's a role you're going to have to try and fill. Maybe it's Isaiah Oliver, someone they draft, but that's a lot of coverage impact, and it's going to be more important this year. So they got to figure out how to, account for that. And then they also got to figure out who their returner is and who's going to, have the chance to make some of those plays. So there's some questions to answer, but Brant Boyer has been really consistent, probably the greatest model of consistency with this team over the past 7-8 years or so. So I do trust him to
3 different regimes.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned like who the Jets are going to have back there, and obviously right now as it stands, it's Gibson or Abanikanda. Unless you're in a situation where it's like, have to win the game, then I think you put Breece Hall back there. But it's something that they could, and not to get away from the point we just made, but if they're at pick 72 and there's a guy that they really like there, like is a deep receiver draft, and then maybe there's a guy like Malachi Corley there. What are you kind of thinking in terms of the type of receiver the Jets might be interested in? Because I think this special teams rule kind of really it increases the value of having a guy who look, I think Gibson can do a lot of the Jets sweep stuff, be your gadget slot receiver. And he obviously had the great punt return week 1, but after that, I don't think he really did much. And so if you get to pick 72 and there's a guy available there that you like in that role, is Xavier Gibson going to prevent you from drafting him, especially with the added value of the kickoff now? How much does that kind of factor into, like, we obviously all know that the Jets need to add another receiver. Again, it'll be best player available. But if you're going to draft a receiver, what are the traits that you're really looking for now? When you look at the Jets, have Garrett Wilson on one side, you have Mike Williams, assuming he's healthy. On the other side, you have Alan Lazard. Figure out what to do with him. But hey, I mean, back in that receiver 3, maybe receiver 4 role, and he's got Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, I don't think he's going to be horrific, especially now that he's not going to be relied upon to be Garrett Wilson's Robin. But they have a hole there. Maybe it's a free agent. Maybe it'll be OBJ. But if they go through the draft, or free agency, I guess, what are the traits that you're really looking for in an added receiver? Like, what are they still missing, do you think?
Well, I think the return skills, there are a few extra bonus points applied. Like if all things are equal, one guy has the returning, the other doesn't. Obviously, you lean towards him, but I don't think you want to overvalue it too much. Like especially in third round, I think it's a little high to draft someone just for his returning. But it is a much bigger factor than it was the past few years. I mean, last year was the record low. I think the average team was only returning about one kickoff a game, and you're talking about 10 years earlier.
Did the Jets even have a kickoff return for a touchdown? Obviously,
The
the
Jets
punt
didn't last year.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. What was the last kickoff return for? Obviously, it was
Barrios in 2021. I don't even think they had one over 30 yards last year. But
so was it the Jags?
The
Barrios kickoff against the Jags
didn't matter. So now I think like you consider kickoff returns in it, but we'll see how it goes before you want to overvalue it. But like you said, I think there's a chance that you come out this year and we're halfway through the season and we're like, kickoff returns are a little overpowered right now. I can see a possibility of kickoff returns kind of going crazy. Maybe they adjust the rules, and it was only a 1 year thing. So it is. It can be changed after this year.
I will say, if it's too overpowered with the Jets defense, I would just start kicking it through the end zone, honestly. Because if it's one of those things where it's like, hey, our Jets defense is averaging, I don't know how many points per game, but they're among the league leaders in not allowing points per game this year. And then you're giving up a kickoff return for a touchdown once every 4 games. Yeah. It's like, all right, maybe we just boot it through the end zone and spot them the extra 10 yards. That's just like one, Michael Clemens personal foul penalty. We can survive off that. The other thing, and I don't think we've talked about this really at all the last couple weeks, but it's a minor story, but I guess more of a major story for bigger NFL media outlets is like, what do the Jets do with Zach Wilson? I think as most Jets fans, like we've kind of just put it behind us in the review mirror. Zach Wilson's gone. He's off this team, but doesn't seem like the Jets have a trade partner. Nobody wants to trade assets and eat the $5 million in cap space for a guy who has frankly been one of the worst quarterbacks the last 3 years. He does still have some potential, so maybe he has some fans around the league to bring him in as a QB3. But if you're going to give up a day 3 pick and pay him $5 million, so people have floated out the idea that the Jets, just to get the cap relief, could try to attach a day 3 pick, and maybe that's how the Zach Wilson trade happens. It'll certainly be something to watch during the draft because I could see that happening. But if they get to a scenario, Michael, where it's like they can't really do that, there's not a team that's willing to take a 7th to eat the $5 million in cap space for Zach Wilson. Are you cutting him and eating all $11 million? Or is he that much of a distraction that you couldn't just take him into preseason and see if somebody gets hurt in preseason, give him those preseason reps? Maybe he's looking a lot better. And hey, maybe there is a team that in August, calls and says, you know what? Hey, our backup's gone down. We'll give you a 2025 conditional 7th for him, but we will eat the salary. Like that scenario to me is plausible. And I don't think he's going to cause that much of a stink. I don't know the inner workings and the team chemistry and if the Jets draft a rookie quarterback, how that might all work. But how do you kind of see the Zach Wilson situation unfolding? Because I just don't see, and Woody even said, I don't see them just cutting him outright and eating the $11 million.
Yeah, I mean, I think the appeal of keeping him, if you can't trade him, is to give him the opportunity to boost his trade value in the preseason. I mean, I think he's going to get a lot of reps. Rodgers will probably play his one drive in the, dress rehearsal game, or maybe he won't play at all. I think he will, but, at most you're talking 1 or 2 drives. Tyrod's probably not going to play much. He's a veteran. So Zach Wilson's going to, if he's still on the team. And also, I don't think you want to play Tyrod too much. I mean, they'd probably add another random third quarterback if they got rid of Zach Wilson.
They're going to draft somebody. I mean, right? I think regardless of what happens to Zach Wilson, going back to our earlier conversation about position, they're doing a lot of work on these day 3 quarterbacks. If they love somebody, I could see him taking him at 72. But I think in day 3 they're going to take somebody because they want another young quarterback to sit behind Rodgers to learn from one of the best quarterbacks of all time. And hey, Tyrod has an injury history, and you're assuming week 1 of the regular season, Zach's not going to be there. So you need another guy. So it does create a weird dynamic, but I kind of agree with you that like in the preseason, does Tyrod really need to play that much? Rodgers definitely doesn't. So maybe it's like first half Zach Wilson, second half developmental guy. Like, is that how they, how many reps is that
Yeah.
developmental guy getting in training camp?
Yeah, so I mean, I could see the argument for cutting him, just kind of in fairness to him as well, because I'm sure he really wants to get out of there just to have a
Yeah.
fresh start. And for the team, it probably would be nice to not have it around. Not that it's not like he's a diva or anything who's ruining the locker room. It is an extra story, but it's not like he's a negative presence.
Yeah.
So I would probably lean towards just keeping him. See if you could get him to boost his trade value in the preseason, and if not, then you could maybe cut him as part of the final roster cuts, I guess. But probably, I guess, cutting him for nothing just takes away the possibility of him making himself worth more in the preseason. Or a team, quarterbacks are going to get injured and they'll get more desperate at that point. So I think if you keep him, you will get a trade for something later
Yeah.
this year.
It'll be probably a conditional pick swap if it happens. It'll be like a 7th for a 6, something like that. But like I could see I could see it happening on draft day, probably day 3 of the draft, something where a team is like, all right, we'll eat the salary, but then you give us a 6 this year and we'll give you a 7th next year, something like that, where it's like ultimately a net loss for the Jets. But hey, that $5 million allows you to bring back Ashton Davis or sign J.K. Dobbins or, something else. And maybe they just feel like that's worth it to them. All right, let's get into a little bit more of the draft stuff because we've kind of covered most of what else is happening. I guess let's open it up here, and I hinted at it a little bit earlier, but the whole debate about what the Jets should do with their pick. And look, I think there's a pretty simple big board for who they're going to take at 10. I mean, they could trade up, and we'll get into that discussion a little bit. But like, if they stay in the top 10, if they don't trade down, one of Rome Odunze, Talise Fuaga, the offensive tackle from Oregon State, J.C. Latham, the offensive tackle from Alabama, Fatanu, the offensive tackle from Washington, Olu Fashanu, the offensive tackle from Penn State. Brock Bowers is going to be a Jet. They could trade up, maybe get into Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr. territory. They could trade up, maybe get into Joe Alt territory. But one of those guys is going to be a Jet. And so a lot of people are getting into the ideological battle of like, well, is it worth it to take Talise Fuaga, who's a right tackle? You already have Morgan Moses. He's technically going to be a backup. In a win now year, your 10th overall pick, should he be a backup? And I say absolutely yes. Because first of all, the odds that guy doesn't see the field is less than 1%. Like, he will 100% see the field. In fact, I would say if you look at all the Jets offensive lines for the last, how many years, 10, whatever, for the most part, your 6 offensive lineman is going to play more games than he doesn't play. And especially if you get a guy like Fatanu and even Fuanga, who I think can be versatile, but Fatanu, who's guard and tackle experience, it's like he could maybe push John Simpson to start at left guard. Hell, maybe if he's good enough, he can push Morgan Moses to start at right tackle. Even if he doesn't, you have 2 offensive tackles, one of which who hasn't played a full season since 2015, the other one coming off a torn rotator cuff, both in their 30s, both on 1-year deals. And we talk about how 2025 is going to be a year that they're not going to have a lot of cap space. You look towards the future, you don't want to be replacing both your offensive tackles next year. So it's like you bring in a guy that fortifies the depth of your offensive line, that allows it. If like, hey, Tyron Smith, he goes down week 2, it's like, hey, you can slide this guy right in. You have a premium asset, another premium asset on your offensive line. It's also protection for the future, where it's like next year, hey, if all the guys stay healthy, maybe Tyron Smith gets a bigger deal elsewhere next year, or maybe Morgan Moses gets, you know what I mean? And you're not going to have to be left in that position where it's like you're filling both your offensive tackle spot. It's just like, it's mind blowing to me that anybody who's watched the Jets the last decade, like you think about like, when were the Jets last good? When did they last make the playoffs? It's when they had an elite offensive line. It's like, do you want to be dominant on the offensive line or not? And you can never have too many blue chip offensive linemen. It's a great offensive tackle class. One of those guys is going to be there. You could take one, fortify the depth, secure the future. I mean, just look at, and I had a tweet about this, but it's like, just look at the Lions last year if you want to know how far an elite offensive line can take you. It's like, yes, they had other weapons. It's like, yeah, the Jets got plenty of weapons too, and a Hall of Fame quarterback. The thing that's held them back all these years is they can't block for shit. I mean, last year it looked so bad at times. I mean, I don't have the photo up, but we have the one background that we used a couple times where it's like Zach Wilson and then just 5 Dolphins right in his face. It's like, if you want to avoid that situation where it's like you're in November and Rodgers' offensive line is Wes Schweitzer, Xavier Newman, Max Mitchell, Carter Warren, it's like you can help that. You can alleviate that situation by taking an offensive tackle. And again, this is coming 20 minutes, and I'll go to you in a second, but this is coming 20 minutes after having the whole, like, they're not going to draft for needs. They're going to take the best player available. If pick 10 rolls around and Rome Odunze is available and the Jets have him highly rated, higher rated than any of the tackles on the board, like Daniel Jeremiah, Joe Douglas's buddy, has. I think Odunze was like his 3rd best prospect or something like that, and Alt was 5 or 6 or something like that. He might have Fuanga as his best tackle, actually. Whatever. Beside the fact, if Odunze is available at 10 and he's their highest ranked guy, maybe I can see it. And yes, it'll be fun, and yes, it'll help Garrett Wilson, and it'll make the offense more exciting. But like, I trust Aaron Rodgers to make it work if there are injuries at receiver, to make it work with Jason Brownlee and whoever else they bring in, Xavier Gibson and Mike Williams, whatever, Alan Lazard. Then I trust Aaron Rodgers to make it work with Xavier Newman and Max Mitchell and Jake Hansen and any of those guys blocking for him if the offensive line falls apart. It's like, to me, it's the most important position outside of quarterback, maybe outside of edge rusher, is having a great offensive tackle. You have 2 good ones for sure. One great one, one good one, but they're both over 30. They both have injury issues. They're both going to be free agents next year. Go and take one of these blue chip offensive tackles in a great offensive tackle class. And last thing, there's been a dearth of good offensive linemen in this league. And this is a class where it's stacked. Take one of these guys early. Like, I just don't get the logic of like, well, he's a back. Like, the amount of people that I was arguing with on Twitter the last couple of weeks that are just like completely oblivious to the line play that we've had to watch the last couple of years. And it's like, yeah, on paper, the offensive line looks good right now, but let's see how it looks in week 4. How many different offensive line combinations have we been forced to watch? It's like, anyways, I could keep going, but I want to give it to you. Just that philosophy of like, hey, it's like Brock Bowers, this generational tight end prospect, Rome Odunze, if he's available. I don't think Neighbors or Harrison Jr. will be there, but like Rome Odunze, he's an exciting receiver prospect. That'd be pretty cool to have opposite Garrett Wilson. But to me, it's like offensive line or bust at 10, for me, at least.
So you're asking me if I agree with that?
I don't know. I just wanted to get that off my chest. You can go wherever. You can talk about defense if you want. I mean, no. Yeah, what do you think?
I'm mostly on the same page. I mean, I think it depends on their board. If they really love Odunze, then I think you could get on board with that if he's available. But I'm mostly on the same page as you, because like, you can't draft for what your depth chart looks like right now or what it looks like at its best case scenario. You got to prepare yourself for the likely scenarios, and Tyron Smith is going to miss at least 3 games. That's what you should assume, unless
at least
you're being delusional, because literally 8 years in a row he's missed at least 3 games. So you would just thank the football gods if he doesn't. So you got to expect that. Morgan Moses is usually durable, but he missed, I think, 3 games last year, and he exited a lot of other games, and he's over 30. So you're assuming guys are going to miss games, and whatever tackle you draft, he's going to play probably at least double the snaps that Will McDonald played last year.
Yeah.
I drafted him in the first round, and at least match what Jermaine Johnson played a couple years ago. So a tackle he's going to play. It's not a wasted short-term pick by any sense. You want to be prepared for the inevitable injuries on a unit that, and the thing about the offensive line is there are so many paths to playing times. Like, obviously it's not rotated and the starters all play the whole game, but because there's 5 spots, including, 2 tackles, like, someone's probably going to get injured because there's so many players out there. So there's always going to be a path for you to get on the field through injuries at some point, unless, you're blessed enough to have 34 out of 34 starts from your 2 tackles. So yeah, I agree with everything you said.
In the context,
the tackle is going to play. Yeah.
In the context that your quarterback is 40, coming off a torn Achilles. I mean, like, Rodgers was, Rodgers was a good athlete as a younger quarterback. You watch in the last couple of years, 2021, 2022 is 2020. He's not Lamar Jackson, obviously, but he still, gets out in the pocket, can make guys miss. His pocket maneuverability is great. But like, I would imagine he's going to be a little bit more of a pocket passer this year, maybe a little bit. And he's going to prioritize getting the ball out of his hands quickly. But it's like, you want to limit first of all, he's going to be slower. So you just want to build the wall in front of him. But it's also like you want to limit the amount of hits that he's going to take on that. Because the Jets' Super Bowl hopes really rides on Aaron Rodgers. Maybe if maybe Tyrod Taylor if Rodgers goes down in the playoffs. But like really, if the Jets are going to win a Super Bowl, it's going to be with number 8 hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. And you should do everything in your power to prevent any scenario where he goes down again, whether it's week 1 or week 17. It could completely derail the Jets' chances. So it's like, yes, a receiver is more exciting. Yes, you would buy his jersey instead of an offensive tackle's jersey, but it's like, build the wall, please.
The most important point that you made, I think, is a comparison of like what is more manageable: Aaron Rodgers with a bunch of no-name receivers, or Aaron Rodgers with a bunch of no-name linemen. And as you said, it's definitely the latter.
He's been fine with.
Oh no, the one with the receivers being injured. Because like imagine like the offensive line as it looks right now on paper. Aaron Rodgers behind that, throwing to say Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams are out, and it's Lazard, Gibson are your top receivers. Plus, say they draft someone 3rd round or whatever. Not ideal by any sense, but with that offensive line, that protection, and the run game you'd still get with Breece Hall, and you could still throw to him, you could still throw to Conklin. Aaron Rodgers is going to make that work. He's played however many years over the latter half of his Green Bay career with just Devontae Adams at receiver. And obviously that beats the scenario I'm putting out, but it's not like he's used to having or thriving off of these receiver groups that have tons of good players. The offensive line in Green Bay was more consistently good than the receiving group as a whole. Obviously, he had Adams, but then you look at the other scenario. Say you still have Garrett Wilson, you still have Mike Williams. The whole group is out there. Even throw the 1st-round pick in there, Odunze or whoever, and say your offensive line is the unit we had at points near the end of last year. You mentioned some of them. Just all those random guys out there. It does not matter who's running the routes if you have Xavier Newman at center and he's getting a swim move over the top, and you have whoever, Ed Oliver, running in his face immediately. It does not matter who's that receiver. But the other way around, if you're getting time at quarterback, if you have a good run game, he could still do everything. And at some point, receivers will get open if you have time. It does not go the other way. So I agree that offensive line is priority for me.
And when you look at Rodgers' career, there's a direct correlation between the offensive line he has in front of him and his success. And a lot of people point to like 2022, obviously the thumb injury, but people point to like, oh, he had the young receivers. They didn't have any weapons. All he had was Lazard. But it's like also the offensive line fell apart. Also, Bakhtiari had all of his injury issues, and Billy Turner was a starting offensive tackle, and that offensive line just wasn't the same, and Rodgers didn't look the same because of it. So it's like Rodgers with time, guaranteed to be good. Rodgers behind a patchwork offensive line, I'm sorry, like Rome Odunze would be nice. Brock Bowers might be nice, but it's the difference. To me, it's just like it's the potential ramifications of passing on offensive tackle here. And even if you take 172, it's just like you can just go ahead and get that blue chip guy. It'll help you this year, and it helps you next year and the foreseeable future if you get the pick right. To me, it's a no-brainer. And
too, like
one more thing. The other thing, it's not just Rodgers too. Like so much of this you have one of the best running backs in all of football in Breece Hall right now. Why not help him and give him the offensive line that he deserves? He's had just utter shit in front of him blocking for. If you have an offensive line for Breece Hall, a lot of these guys, especially Fuanga and Fatanu, great run blockers. It's like you can add a piece like that to this offensive line in front of Breece Hall, and AVT's come back from injury. You have Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith. It's like it's not just protecting Rodgers, but you're also giving your superstar running back finally the offensive line he deserves, and who knows what he does. Look at all the all-purpose yards he got last year with just nothing in front of him. Imagine if he just had a little bit of blocking in front of him, how much better he'd be. So to me, it's obvious what they should do, and I think Joe D will come through it. The former offensive lineman, I don't see him not taking an O-line in the first round here.
Sorry, I was just gonna say on top of that, a lot of people don't realize that this later career version of Rodgers, he's when under pressure just been like an average quarterback in terms of where his pressured stats rank. It's usually like in the 16s and 20s. When he won those 2 MVPs, the most recent ones, it's because his stats when he was kept clean were the best in the league by far. When he's clean right now, that's when he's at his best. I know you mentioned his mobility, like he still had some the past few years, but not close to where he was in his prime. When he was successful in 20 and 21, it's because he was a quick passing pocket quarterback. That's who he is at this stage if he's going to be elite. And he'll throw the, improvisational stuff in there sometimes. He could still do it. Although at this point, post Achilles, maybe even less so than recent years, but he can still be a dominant pocket quarterback getting the ball out quick. So
yeah.
That's
to
what
me,
you need. You really need to emphasize
I'm
that.
expecting Tom Brady. That's what I'm expecting. Like the same play style
Bucks,
of like
Tom Brady. I mean, he was always kind of
even,
that way.
Even Pat's Tom Brady. Like
to an
it's like
extreme with the Bucks.
Brady was great. His pocket maneuverability was always great. Obviously, you could do some QB sneaks. Maybe you don't do that with Rodgers. And like Brady, they would have times where he could get out in the pocket and he'd hobble out there. But like that's what I'm expecting for Rodgers. But hey, Rodgers, maybe the limitations aren't there as much. He was ready to practice in December, but like still, you just don't want him taking hits because the second it's like he had a major injury that has ripple effects that can affect his other Achilles. It can, look, J.K. Dobbins had the speed bridge on and then he just tore his other Achilles. Like you just don't, once you have a major injury like that, the compensation in the rest of your body, his knee ligaments, he's already had problems. It's just like, let's just limit the amount of times that this guy's getting a hit. It's just so clear to me. And it's like, hey, you have a receiver 1 in Garrett Wilson. You have about as good as it gets in terms of a receiver 2 in Mike Williams, who his injury issues to me are overblown. I know he's coming off the ACL. You have a guy in Lazard who did work with Aaron Rodgers. And it's like, I think Gibson will probably be better. I think Rodgers will make all these receivers better. It'll be harder for him to make the offensive line better. He can get the ball out of his hands quicker, but he's not going to make them block any better. So, and you got Breece Hall. So to me, the choice is clear. And also, like you wrote that article about Bowers. Like I know he's excited, but exciting to some Jets fans. But to me, it's like I'm not taking that guy. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
like
I agree. I agree.
A first round tight end who's a little undersized. A lot of his production is just like schemed up receiver screens. Yes, he's exciting, and I know he was great in college, and he'll probably be good in the NFL. But like, what was the last amazing first round tight? I know Laporta went in the mid teens last year, and he was pretty solid. But like, what was the last amazing? Like, think about all the guys they've hyped up from Kyle Pitts to OJ Howard to
Eric Ebron.
Like they hyped them up as these great, amazing. Like this is gonna be this is the next Gronk or whatever. It's like, yeah, Gronk and Kelsey were day 2 picks, so you can get. And Tyler Conklин's a damn good tight end, and he's gonna be a good tight end with Rodgers. You have Ruckert. They'll probably draft another one or bring in a tight end 3. But like to me, it's like the difference. The impact that Brock Bowers is going to have on this team is going to be significantly less than the impact a rookie offensive tackle is going to have on this team. It's not even close. Even though the rookie offensive tackle is technically the backup and Brock Bowers might technically be the starter, might be tight end number 2. It's like your 6 offensive tackle is essentially a starter. So I think the lowest amount of offensive linemen used, I forget the exact team. I think it was 7 for a team this year. And the Jets use like 15. So it's like he's going to play. So we'll do the podcast with Blewett next week. We'll get into these guys a little bit more in terms of like rank, talking through them. I got to say, I'm a little biased to the Beavs. Grew up in Oregon. I like Fuanga. But one of Fuanga or Futanu is going to be there. And I like their versatility. I like what they're going to bring. I know Joe Blewett's very high on JC Latham. Yeah, I don't know. I'm excited for them just to add another piece. I guess, we can close with this.
Are we moving off the Bowers topic? I had a lot to add.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, go. All you, buddy.
Okay. Well, I haven't gone, like you said, I want to defer to Blewett when we bring him on. He's done so much film work on these guys in terms of specifically looking at them. But in terms of Bowers and just the, what he brings to the table specifically and the positional value aspect of it, I just don't see it at 10 at all for me personally. And there's a number of reasons for that. Before even talking about like him specifically and the things that concern me, just the idea of a tight end at 10, and you mentioned it, it feels like every other year there's kind of, maybe not exactly every other year, but at least every few years, one of those guys comes up and they're just never that good. Even if they are good, they're not even close to what a receiver in this spot can give you. Like look at Hawkinson. He was a highly drafted tight end. He was successful, and he's about as good as it gets. And what does he give you? Like 800 yards, 5 touchdowns a year?
Yeah.
Something like that. Or he had 960 this year. He had a good year, but that was his best season. Overall for his career, 49 yards a game. Like the best case scenario for a tight end isn't even close to what the impact a receiver can make. And then we already talked a ton about what offensive linemen could do. I would take that as well. And you look at most of the best tight ends in recent history, most of them weren't first round picks. Kelsey, not a first round pick. Gronk, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Darren Waller. None of these guys first round picks. It's a position that is really hard to project in terms of like this guy's a generational talent. I think it's a lot more about fit and just ultimately when they get to the league, I think it's proven compared to other positions, it's hard to look at college and say this is how you're going to do in the league. And I think a big part of that is because tight end production is a lot more scheme based than I think receiver is. And you look at Bowers specifically, it's a huge concern with him because his receptions last year, 48% of them were behind the line of scrimmage, which is outrageous. That's half
Yeah.
the time he was catching a schemed up pass that he didn't even have to separate to get. And that's not going to happen in the NFL. You'll scheme some passes for him, but you won't be able to do even close to that. Like for comparison, the highest rate for tight ends last year, among tight ends with at least 50 targets in the NFL, for the percentage of their targets that were behind the line of scrimmage was 20% by Gerald Everett. And Bowers was 39.4%, double the highest in the league at the position. So he was playing an absurd style of football that's not going to translate to the league. And I'm not saying he won't be a good player. I think he'll be solid. But again, we're talking about the 10th overall pick, and that's what is the key point in this discussion. If the Jets trade down middle first round, somehow he slips and he's still there, then sure, I could get on board with it. But at top 10, like comparing to what a receiver can give you, a tackle, a solid
Not
tight
even
end
close.
just isn't close to the same impact. And again, I think he will be solid. I'm not saying he sucks or anything, but I don't think he's this, game-changing weapon. And I know a lot of people say he can line up in the slot and things like that. You could view him as a slot receiver. He's not going to produce like a slot receiver. Like what tight end in the league is doing that?
Yeah, no,
I mean,
he's.
outside
I
of
mean, look,
Travis
like
Kelce,
the
who's
thing
like
that's
an
that's
outlier.
appealing. The thing that's appealing about Bowers is his yak, his yards after catch. I mean, he's a dog,
Yeah.
and I think people see and he's also a great blocker. So people see him as maybe being the next like George Kittle. That's the comparison that's thrown out a lot. But to me, it's like he's a little bit undersized. All of his not all of his production, but half of his production, more than half, is schemed up. And
Yeah.
Blewett, I've watched Blewett's film reviews on him, and he has other more finer critiques of his route running and his hands catching and all that stuff. It's just like this isn't like the slam dunk generational. This is the best player on the board. They got to take him. Like I think it's just because he gets the hype, and he obviously is a great college player. But when you look at the need and the player and the value, it's like very clear to me that he should not be the pick at 10. I think that the two things that when we touched on a little bit, it's like it's possible.
Also, one more thing about Bowers
Yeah,
I was going to mention is a lot of people talk about him like he's the best win now pick, and part of it is because we said with tackle, you're drafting a backup. If you get a tackle receiver, you're drafting a third receiver, versus Bowers would probably be your number one guy, presumably, if you're going to draft him that high. But if you're talking about impact this year, the first thing to consider with tight end is it's largely considered one of the biggest growth curve positions in terms of needing to develop before you get to your peak. Even like I brought up Hawkinson, he's one of the best first round pick tight ends of the past 10 years. And he didn't get to the level he's at now until like third or like fourth, fifth season. And so if you're talking about win now, tight end is not the best position to target in the first round. And on top of that, if you're talking about impact this year for the Jets, you have to compare versus what they have. Like, who's he replacing? Tyler Conklin is, I'm not, and don't take this as me saying don't draft Bowers because you have Tyler Conklin. I'm not saying Conklin is so good as to where you should avoid upgrading tight end because you don't want to make the mistake of let's not draft Sauce because we have Bryce Hall. Let's not draft Brees Hall because
it's a
we
little
have Michael
different.
Carter. So I'm not saying it in that way, but if you're talking about who's going to help us the most now, you are talking about like how much better is Bowers going to be versus Conklin compared to how much better is the tackle we get. Say it's Fashanu. How much better is he going to be than Carter Warren, or how much better is Odunze going to be compared to Lazard? That's not even close to the same impact in
Yeah.
terms of year one. Like what was Conklin's stat line last year? I'm going to pull it
He
up
had like over
right
500 yards.
now.
I was arguing with a
And
guy
then
on Twitter who kept being like, he had all of our
yeah,
tight ends in the roster had 0 touchdowns. I was like, I mean, Garrett Wilson had like 3
that
touchdowns.
that has nothing to do with how
Like,
good he is. Like, but
did you watch?
Conklin,
Yeah.
621 yards last year, 61 catches. He had 552 a year before that, and then with Minnesota, he had 593. And then not great situations the last 2 years. How much more on top of that is Bowers adding? Like, say he just replaces Conklin's role, hypothetically, which I don't even think he would necessarily, because,
No.
like I said, tight end does have a growth curve. That is he how
I mean,
much more on
Conklin's going to
top
be
of
a
that?
better route runner
Considering
year
that
one.
Conklin's stats are going to be better because Aaron Rodgers is coming in, and he's already a very sharp route runner, which a lot of people don't know because he hasn't had a good quarterback to show it that often, but it's clearly there when you watch his film. So how much more on top of that is Bowers adding versus like you're going from Carter Warren to one of these tackles as your
Wonga.
backup, or uh, Lazard is your third receiver to whoever you draft. So yeah, the idea that he's the best short-term pick, like for this year, I don't buy that he's the best impact in that way either. So yeah, I'm pretty strongly against the idea of drafting Bowers at number 10. It's not to say I hate him, because like the yak skills they're definitely very special, like that aspect of his
Yeah.
profile. But there are enough concerns outside of that to where I'm not sold he's this instant Travis Kelce who transforms your offense.
No, I think you're dead on there. And I think that's a take that's going to age well, Michael. Anyway,
Hopefully.
let's get into before we get out of here. Let's just talk a little bit about the 9 teams ahead of the Jets in the draft here. Just to kind of set the lay of the land. Obviously, we got 17 days until the draft here, but just looking at like, okay, well, who is going to be on the board when the Jets are picking? Because I think I've heard a lot of people talk about, okay, maybe the Jets could trade up, and the only way I see them trading up, and this is going to be counter to everything I've said, would be to get one of these receivers. Like maybe they would trade up for Joe Alt, but I just think that the difference between Alt and Fuanga and Fatanu and like I don't think it would be worth the trade up unless it's maybe for like, you know, I don't know the exact trade value if they're moving from 10 to 8 and Alt still available, something like that, which I don't think he gets past the Titans. But like, there are a lot of teams from the Cardinals to the Chargers to the Giants that might be looking to trade back. And if Malik Neighbors is there and they have him as a top 3 player on their board, maybe they do it. And it's been Joe Douglas has been very aggressive. It's been a win now it's a win now type of year for the Jets. And I would be, I think there's a gap from Harrison and Neighbors to a Dunze. We could talk about these players a little bit more with Blewett next week. But for me, like, that's an exciting move. I still think they need to go with the offensive tackle, but if they trade up, I think it would be for a Harrison Jr. or Neighbors. And I don't know what it's going to cost to get from 10 to 5. I mean, I think I don't know if you want to give up 72 since you don't have the second round pick. Maybe you have to. It's probably going to involve future picks next year. Maybe it's a future second. I don't know exactly what that trade might look like, but I thought I'd throw that out there because I've seen some people talk about the trade up. That would be the most exciting thing the Jets could do would be to trade up to 5, swap with the Chargers, go get Marvin Harrison Jr. or Neighbors, and that would be very exciting. But I think it's more likely that the Jets would trade down. The problem with that is you have to have a dance partner, and I don't know. I mean, they're kind of in a good spot because they're right ahead of those 3 teams right behind them in the Vikings, the Broncos, and the Raiders, who all have a quarterback need. And so maybe maybe McCarthy's there at 10, and one of those 3 teams or another team hops up to where the Jets are to try to snag it. If the Jets are only moving back 2 or 3 spots, I mean, I don't know what maybe they're getting a third there. Who knows what they're getting in that scenario? But I think the trade down is a lot more likely. I think McCarthy would probably have to be there. Maybe teams coming up for the best defensive player on the board, whoever you think that is, maybe one of those edge rushers. But ultimately, I think it's going to be kind of hard. I think there's going to be a lot of trades in the top 10, but ultimately, I just don't know if the Jets are in that position. Like, I think that the team right in front of them, like the Bears at 9, I think that's a pick that I don't know how bold this is. I don't think it's going to be the Bears making that pick. I think either the Bears are going to do that trade with the Chargers to move up and to try to get a receiver to pair with Caleb Williams, or they're the team that's going to move back for a team like maybe the Saints who desperately need an offensive tackle. They're picking at 14 to hop the Jets to get their offensive tackle. But let's just very quickly, let's run through this. Obviously, the Bears are going to take Caleb Williams. Everybody knows that. The Commanders at 2 going to take either Jaden Daniels or Drake May. So the first two teams we already know are going to be QBs. The Patriots are obviously the interesting part of the draft where it's like they really could go quarterback. They're the first team that there could be a trade up here. One of those teams right behind the Jets could be moving up for May or Daniels, or hell, even McCarthy's getting a lot of buzz there. Or the Pats just stay there and take Daniels. I doubt they'd stay there and take Harrison Jr. or Alt. I just think you're either taking the quarterback there or you're moving down, just because there's going to be a market there to trade down. The Cardinals, another interesting team where it's like either they stay there and take Harrison Jr. or Neighbors, or they trade down. So the first part of this draft is great for the Jets because it's just a lot of quarterbacks going off the board. I think the best case scenario is that you could argue maybe the best case scenario is McCarthy falling if you want to have that trade back scenario. But I think there's a chance that 4 quarterbacks go in the top 10. I think it's probably more likely than not that all 4 quarterbacks go in the top 10. And that's going to keep pushing these offensive tackles down the board. I think the first team that could potentially take an offensive tackle is the Chargers at 5, because obviously Jim Harbaugh has been talking a lot about building up his offensive line. You look at the receiver depth chart, though, and it's like, I don't know how you can pass on a receiver. But they're not going to be drafting for needs. I think Jim Harbaugh has been very clear he wants to build an amazing offensive line. I think the Chargers are a team that could trade down and take an offensive lineman, or they could just take Joe Alt right there. Then 6 with and Michael, if you want to jump in here, and I'm just kind of going here, but I thought I'd run through this and then you can kind of talk through what you're thinking. But then at 6, the Giants, probably a receiver. I mean, you look at that depth chart, that's probably where Neighbors or Dunze is going to go. 7 with the Titans, that's a team that's you'd imagine is going to take an offensive lineman. So if no offensive lineman have been taken, I think that's where Joe Alt's going to go. If not, maybe that's where the second offensive tackle goes. The Falcons at 8, bit of a wild card. They're a trade down spot for McCarthy. A lot of people think they could take a defensive player. I don't think they're going to take a receiver or an offensive lineman, so I'm not too worried about the Falcons. And then the Bears, they could really go anywhere. I think they want to get another receiver, but I'm not going to pretend to really know what the Bears are going to do. I think they could go anywhere here. But anyways, I run through all that just to say that one of these top offensive linemen is going to be available. I think at the very least, one offensive tackle is going to go, right? Like Joe Alt won't be available at 10. I think it's possible, depending on what the Chargers do, that 2 of them are going to be taken. So maybe Fuanga and Alt aren't available. But the Jets, to me, are going to get the second or third best offensive tackle on the board. I don't see I mean, maybe there's a scenario. When was the last time 3 offensive tackles went in the top 10? Like, maybe there's a scenario 3 of them are gone. But the thing that's so good about this offensive tackle class, it's like, all right, either you're going to get, so let's say Joe Alt's off the board. Let's say Fuanga's off the board. And let's say Olu Fashana's off the board. You still have Fatanu and Latham right there, who are top 10 worthy offensive lineman that you can add to this team. Anyway, so when I run through that top 9, and I kind of flew through that, and I don't know how helpful that was, but when you hear that how the board could kind of fall for the Jets, kind of what are your thoughts on like just everything that we've been talking about now, from Bowers, who will almost definitely be available. I don't think Adunze is going to be available. It's probably one of these offensive linemen or Bowers. I mean, just how do you make of the 9 teams in front of the Jets and kind of how that board could fall?
Well, I think the first thing to consider is whether a wide receiver does fall to them, because I think if Odunze is there, they would take him. I mean, that's not like a shocking thing to say because it would be a surprise based on how it's all playing out. But yeah, I think they would. But Bowers, like trying to gauge their interest on Bowers is an interesting part of this because, I mean, we made our thoughts clear. I don't think we're on board with it. But would they be on board with it? Is that a pick Douglas would make? Yeah.
So you think if Adunze is there, they take him?
I do think so.
And is that just because you think the only thing that kind of makes me think that would be possible is like, and I don't want to read too much into this, but Daniel Jeremiah having Adunze so highly ranked on his big board. I think he hasn't missed his. I should pull it up. He might have Marvin Harrison Jr. ahead of him. But I always look at Daniel Jeremiah's big board because usually he came up with Joe Douglas. They're great friends. Usually they're not perfect, but a lot of times he's a good guy to read if you're just trying to get a gauge on what Joe Douglas's big board might look like. He has Adunze at 3. So he has Marvin Harrison Jr. at 2, Adunze at 3, Neighbors at 4, Brock Bowers at 7, Alt at 8, and then Fuanga at 10.
I do think.
At 11.
Do you not think they would take him there?
I don't. I really just I can't see how they. This is where it doesn't matter all these rankings that we could do or all these mock drafts that we can do. It's going to come down to their big board. If they have a Dunze at 3 and he's available at 10, I mean, we saw it last year. They
I
stuck
just
to their
think like
board.
I
I
know
think they
Douglas
would.
is a
But
trenches guy, and I know you and I both agree that offensive line is a priority, but I also think he sees receiver as a long term need. Like I know they got Mike Williams, but it is just a 1 year deal, and prior to him becoming available, they didn't seem too desperate to get in on any of those other very attainable wide receiver trades that happened around the league. So if Mike Williams doesn't get cut, and his price was surprisingly affordable, it didn't seem like they had that desperation. So I still feel like, considering that, they probably are looking to tap into this receiver class in some way and address that long-term need. So I do
yeah,
think they will view it, just trying to read like what
it's
they're
it,
doing.
it's definitely okay. It's definitely a need. Like both of these positions are need, and obviously Mike Williams has had some injury issues. Again, I do think they're overblown compared to Tyron Smith's injury issues. But to me, I just look at what's the nightmare scenario next year. And obviously it's Rodgers going down, but it's like the offensive line falling apart because then you can't do anything. Then you're increasing the likelihood that Rodgers goes down. You increase the likelihood that they can't move the ball with whoever they have back there. You make Breece Hall significantly less effective. And it's like you have an opportunity there to help fortify the depth, and then you just look long
I
term.
agree.
No,
I
like
agree.
we talked about all this, but like a Dunze
Yeah.
specifically, like, and not that you like again, you don't want to fall into the I shouldn't take Sauce Gardner because they have Bryce Hall, but it's like then you have 3 big body receivers in Garrett Wilson. Like I like a Dunze, and like a lot of people compared him to Larry Fitzgerald, and if Daniel Jeremiah has him as his third best player in the entire big board, like he's a great prospect, but it's like to me, I just want to take one of these offensive linemen. I mean, like it just
I
comes down to your
agree. I
personal. To
agree.
me, I don't have him above Alt. I don't know if I have him above Fuanga. I mean, maybe he's above Latham and Fatanu, but like to me, it's just like it's close. He's right around there, and because it's so close, and it doesn't really matter what our rankings look like. It matters what Joe Douglas's rankings look like. But like, if it's close, Ty goes to the offensive lineman. That's just how I look at it. Like, just philosophically.
I just think he will take their highest ranked, player within the positions they're considering. I'm not saying they would take a quarterback or edge rusher or anything, but between tackle, receiver, and throw Bowers in there, I think he is going to take the highest ranked player without a bias towards the offensive line. Because going back to free agency and like all the moves we've seen so far, they have really, they loaded up on the offensive line and made sure to fill it out without relying on the draft. And like I said, I think to an extent, it seemed like they were prepared to rely on the draft if they had to at receiver. Like I know we ended up getting Mike Williams, but they got pretty deep there, to the point where if they didn't get him, he leaves the building. He doesn't get the sandwich from MYJ Matt. He comes down to Charlotte and signs with the Panthers. Then we're looking at receiver being an obvious pick for the Jets. However they get it done, they have to trade or whatever. But they didn't seem as desperate and I think that does point to me thinking that they're more comfortable with going into this draft needing a receiver than a lineman. Or I could be way off and it just, the chips fell where they did in terms of negotiations and all that.
I mean,
But
look,
I just don't think they're going to be biased at offensive line, though I would. I'm just trying to
I think they
project what
will.
they
I
might
think
do.
I think both Saleh and Douglas have preached about building through the trenches. Obviously, Saleh is a defensive guy and wants to have 25 defensive linemen on his team. But I think they've both watched over their first 3 seasons together that the offensive line has just killed them. I mean, it's not been the only thing that's killed them. Quarterback obviously has, but like the offensive line has not been good at all under Joe Douglas, and that was supposed to be his MO. And with his back against the wall, his ass is on the hot seat. What do I think he does? I think he goes with the offensive line with this class and the amount of like one of these blue chip, A1 offensive tackles is going to be available. I don't see him passing on that opportunity. I could see him even trading down maybe into take one, but I just don't see. And like, I think this is all a moot point because I really think it's going to come down to Bowers, an offensive tackle, and maybe there's a trade down.
I agree. I was going to say
it's
that.
like,
I think it's a moot point anyway because
because
I don't think they're going to trade up.
I don't
And
think they're going to trade up.
any of those receivers get there.
I think like here are the teams that could take receivers. Patriots, probably not, but they could take Marvin Harrison Jr. Patriots, Cardinals, Chargers, Giants, throw the Falcons in there, and the Bears. So there's 6 teams in front of the Jets that could take receiver. I think the Giants are definitely going to take a receiver. If the Cardinals stay there, I think they take Marvin Harrison Jr. And I know the Chargers have a lot of smoke about taking an offensive lineman, but like, look at isn't Joshua Palmer the receiver 1 right now? So
Yeah.
To me, I think it's all a moot point. I think here's my prediction, and we'll get into the draft, but my predictions for the draft is that there's going to be a lot of trades. So it's hard to make a mock, but I think like either the Patriots are taking quarterback or they're trading. The Cardinals, I think they might trade. The Giants, like all these teams, I could see them moving around. I could see, I talked about it, but I could see a team hopping right in front of the Jets to go to 9 to take an offensive tackle. But I think there's going to be a lot of trades. I think all 3 of those receivers are going to go. And I'll even say 4 quarterbacks go, I think, in the top 10. So 4 quarterbacks and 3 receivers go. That's 7 right there. 2 other picks, probably Alt, an offensive tackle. So that's 1 other guy in front of the Jets, and none of them have been defense. Maybe it's another offensive tackle, or maybe it's another defense. But if 4 quarterbacks and 3 receivers, Joe Alt go off the board, you're guaranteed to either get Fuanga or Fatanu or Latham or like any of those guys are going to be available. So this whole last little segment is just to prove, like, I think the Jets are in a good spot at 10. Obviously, we were cheering against them at the end of the season, but they're in a good spot here to add a great offensive lineman to this team. And ultimately, I just think that's the most important thing. And then obviously 72, like, it would be nice to go get your receiver there, because there are plenty of great 3rd-round receivers, and I think they could get an instant contributor. But again, I won't be surprised if it's a corner. That's really the one to me that is jumping out, just with both those guys being free agents next year, Reed and Carter II. And then it's also it's not just next year. It's like, they've been very lucky with their corners staying healthy, but it's like, what if Reed goes down this year? It's like, I guess you have Brandon Eccles, and he's come in and been a spot starter before and been all right. But it's like, that want to talk about things that could sink their team. It's like Sauce and Reed going down would definitely be up there. So I could definitely see a corner. I could see that one's way harder to predict. But for me, 10 is very clear. Offensive tackle. Every year we say we're not going to pick a shopping list, and here I am. It needs to be an offensive tackle. Anything offensive tackle or bust. All right, that's going to do it for us. We'll be back next week. We'll be with Joe Blewett. We're going to talk about these prospects and get into here some of his rankings. We'll ask him some. Obviously, he's the film guy at JetX, so we're going to talk a little bit more of how they could deploy Haason Reddick. We'll probably do our first mock draft. I mean, it's very, very exciting stuff, Michael. And then also next week, I think the new uniforms are going to drop on the 15th. So, I mean, I think our podcast is probably going to come out that same day. So maybe wait so we can see them. Add that as part of the podcast.
Totally dedicated uniform podcast.
Dude, it's been this entire. This is our 5th year of doing the podcast, right? Is this our?
Yep.
We did 2019, 20, 21, 22, 20. Dude,
so this will actually be the 6th.
That season. Wow, time flies. Jeez.
Time flies when you're having no fun at all.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're in misery. Every single time, year, though, we've been talking about these uniforms. So, yeah. All right, maybe we wait till Monday. Either way, our next pod be with Joe Blewett. So, be on the lookout for that. You can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter. You follow Michael _Nania, myself, Ben W. Blessington. You go to jetsxfactor.com. Best place to go for Jets content. Check out all the other Jets podcasts there and articles and whatnot. Subscribe to the Jets X Factor YouTube. If you can, please rate, review, subscribe on iTunes. That helps us out a lot. And I think that's it. Michael, last thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to these uniforms. Who cares about the draft? I'm looking forward to see what the black uniform numbers look like. Are we going to get like pure white numbers?
That's true.
Green outlines. Yeah. Like, what about the shoulder stripes? Like,
the only
thing is what people should be talking.
This is what we play for. The only thing I care about is I want to keep the green helmets for the black uniforms.
Your Twitter account is basically just Jets uniform updates at this point. The only time I see anything from you is retweeting stuff related to uniforms.
I know. Well, hey, I had some, I went back and forth in the whole Haason Reddick stuff and taking it off the tackle. I had a few takes. But like right now we're kind of the
3 of your last 4 are related.
All right, whatever.
Just looked at it.
Well, I feel
I don't really post anything at all right now besides my own articles.
Well, I kind of feel like I've watched these guys and I get into the draft, I make my mock drafts and I read other people's mock drafts, but like I just want to see what route the Jets take because that's the only route that matters. Like, it
I mean,
feels
can
stupid.
I say this? I said this to you, and I don't want to dive into this shtick too much, but I told you that I view myself this year. I've transitioned into this. I'm a draft nihilist. I'm just,
Dark
I don't know. It's
nihilist.
like, I'm just, every single year, as you're saying, you get into it so much, you make these mock drafts, you analyze everybody, and you only get one out of every 32 players, essentially, something like that. You get like 7 players out of the 250 that are drafted, and you never think about those guys again until they come to the Jets in the future. So I just want to know who the Jets are getting so I could dive into them specifically. Right now, it's just like I don't. The draft is so random. I don't feel the passion to like get into like, oh, you think Latham is good? You don't know anything, or you think Fuanga is good.
All we care about is our Brock Bowers agenda, and outside
that's
of that,
the funniest thing to me. Is like I look at the fans debate so passionately about, and maybe I shouldn't. I was pretty passionate about the Bowers thing, but I just like
yeah. But you actually, I mean, you really do. You don't base your opinions on. I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people base their opinions off of 3 minutes of a YouTube highlight. I've been guilty of this as well. It's like you watch the YouTube highlights, maybe you watch them on Saturdays a little bit. But like you're diving into the advanced numbers, you're actually watching the game film, the all 22, not the broadcast angle. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, but still, like regardless, like,
you're upfront about
best. I'll try my best to analyze it with detail, but I'm not gonna get into any debate about a prospect and be so like matter of fact in terms of like you don't know what you're talking about. This is and acting like anything in the draft at all is clear is just being very ignorant about what history shows us every single year is that this is a total crapshoot.
Because there's so many variables. There's so many variables that you just are out of everybody's control that you can't really predict. It's like, how is a 21-year-old going to handle coming into fame and $20 million? Like, is he still going to work the same? And on top of like his actual game too, like how is that going to translate to the NFL? Injuries, scheme fit, coach. Like there's just so much that you can't predict, but take the offensive tackle. All right, we're done. We'll be back next week. Thank you everyone for listening. Let us know what you think. Comment. What do you think the Jets should do at 10? What do you think about Haason Reddick? Whatever else we talked about. I don't know. This is it. We're draft nihilists now, I guess. Yeah. All that matters is what the Jets do. So it's just like,
all right. That be the title of the episode? No, we can't. Like we're not diving all the way into it. Like I said,
not yet.
But I have a slight, piece of that inside of me now. I'm like, I'm still trying to do my best to analyze it. Like I like to do it from an analytical standpoint. Like I talked about Bowers and his trends compared to other tight ends.
The true pass sets thing on the offense.
The true pass sets of the top tackle prospects. I talked about how Odunze's contested catch rate is a really good sign in terms of the trends of recent first round receivers. His ability to make contested catches has correlated with success. So things like that are interesting to me. Seeing which things have tended to lead to success, but it's even those are just as good as it can get. It's still not enough to definitively predict anything. Yeah. So overall, I've just tried to dial back in terms of like having too intense,
just so you can sit back and watch some Lecky Fotu film.
Yeah, like that's what I'm more focused on. Watching and talking about uniforms, of course.
And uniform talk, yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. Go Jets.